Wired for Winning, celebrating the extraordinary minds of those with ADHD. Hey everybody, and welcome to the first Wired for Winning podcast of 2024. Today we have Katie Friedman from Bristol in the UK joining us to tell us about her ADHD journey as well. A very exciting one this is, actually. I've waited quite a while for Katie to come on board, so let's go. So Katie, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. And you have a very, very interesting journey with ADHD, not only with what you do professionally now, but also how you kind of reach that point of finding out about it, and I hope you don't mind me mentioning, but the burnout point in time seems to be that critical thing. Yeah. Welcome again. Tell us a little bit about that story, if that's okay.
That story. So I burnt out from a job in education. That in itself has its own story, which you might ask me about later, of how I ended up there. Okay. But I was basically in a new job with completely different set of circumstances, very little support. And I hadn't quite appreciated the support I'd had in a previous job. And I just stopped sleeping, and people were walking, the head teacher was walking, as in left. I was then next in line. I was trying to hold everything together, trying to do it all on my own, and just wasn't able to see that it was a sort of disaster situation. The constant, no, you just try harder, do better, it'll be fine, just try harder, carried on for about 3 or 4 months. And then at this time, 5 years ago, I realised I was really, really ill, and I'd stopped sleeping. And I went into the training day for the teachers and realised everything had changed, and I couldn't even relate to people. I was so ill and a shell. And that's when I burnt out. And then I retrained as a coach, and that's when, I started to, there were sort of breadcrumbs really about brain being wired differently.
That's interesting. Let's dig in, because I recognize that sense of burnout that you mention, probably in myself, not as extreme, I have to say, but certainly at points in my life, I've felt overwhelmed by life events or jobs or whatever, and thought, my God, I just can't handle this. But, hey, I should be able to, and keep going and keep pushing forward. And eventually all I wanted to do was actually crawl into bed, hide underneath the duvet covers, and want the world to go away completely. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit more about those breadcrumbs. I'm fascinated by that, and what kind of led you to your own diagnosis, if you like.
Mm. I do think they are breadcrumbs, because I do see the diagnosis as the gingerbread house, right? He's full of sweeties. It's really exciting. And The witch was never a witch. She was totally misunderstood. So I guess the first breadcrumb was going to this new school. So what was interesting about this new school, I'd been in a kind of inner city, very multicultural, lots and lots of children who were basically, worrying about whether they had asylum status, and their parents were. And so special needs did play a part, but there was just no, people didn't have the brain space, the headspace to be looking into neurodiversity, for example, awareness in our school. We were working in a kind of different place. And then I went to this quite sort of suburban, very white school, and everyone seemed to have a diagnosis of autism or something. I mean, it was just so high compared to what I'd seen. It was much more normalized. And my ableism at the time was like, what is this, made up, middle class lull? I somehow just got her. She was quite herself, as often the Senkos are. But I just really clicked with her. And she sort of normalized it and was like, yeah, I'm probably autistic too. And the way she normalized it just helped me to I sort of went, probably have something too. But at the time had absolutely no curiosity whatsoever and was not into learning anything about it, because I was
Mm.
top of the tree, how could I possibly? And that's the
Mm.
problem, isn't it? If you're in mainstream school and you're the head teacher or the deputy or acting as the head teacher, you don't see yourself as having SEND because SEND is framed as deficit. And
Yes.
actually, she was the first person to sort of slightly unframe it and normalize it. So that was a breadcrumb. Didn't really take it. Crashed
Okay.
out. Crashed out. Went into went into coach training, and there were parts of coach training that I found quite tricky, and it was like, oh, another thing I can't do. And I did one of those psychometrics. I think it was Clifton Strengths, and all my strengths at that point were in one area, all the creative area. And again, I saw this as another like, you're faulty. What is wrong with you? And this person who was doing it with me was like, I've never seen a profile like that.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Okay.
and to be honest, I think it was also indicative of where I was at the time. So I really don't have much truck with psychometrics because we are so situational. But where I was at the time was very skewed in one area. And so, yeah, that was another indication. And then I met another person who had she on a coaching course around parenting coaching, and they had a son who was autistic, and I'd sort of thrown it out there like, yeah, I probably am, yeah, probably, and she sort of teased it out of me a bit like, so where's the curiosity then? What about getting a diagnosis, and what if it helped you, and all this sort of thing. And in the end, we started talking about neurodiversity a lot. We started talking about going into business around it. This is bizarre because at this point I still don't actually know that I am. I just think I am.
Okay.
And it was sort of with her helping hand that I got a diagnosis. I got a diagnosis in the second lockdown. I had left education, so had no right putting my 3 children into school, even though I now realise they are, they have significant special needs and probably needed to be in school more than many children who got into school. And when we were in the second lockdown, when the weather was terrible, that was probably my lowest point. So I got diagnosed. Imagine they say something about ADHD is confine, deprive, and restrict are massive no-nos. And there we were. We'd actually moved into my mother's 2-bedroom flat because we were getting work done. So this is, family of 3 boys and my husband and I in a 2-bed flat.
Oh, my
in
goodness.
lockdown with nowhere to go and ADHD. And I have it and my sons have it. I mean, I literally now look back and just like it makes my skin crawl.
Can I just ask you a question? And second lockdown in the UK compared to Ireland, compared to the United States, compared to Australia. Could you just define again for the people who are listening to that what second lockdown was in terms of the restrictions of going places, distance limits and things like that, just to put a perspective on it? I think it's important because you're absolutely right. Confinement is probably one of the worst things that can happen to me. But just the second lockdown in the UK, what did that mean? What were the government restrictions there?
Yeah, so it wasn't really as much around restrictions. What it was it was mainly about weather, and also the first lockdown, everyone was in it together, and no one knew what was going on. It was all a bit terrifying, but the weather was insanely beautiful.
Yes.
So I went into creativity mode and was homeschooling my children with a lot of flair because we were in survival crisis kind of thing. And it really worked for me. We did loads, was what it was. Second lockdown, the weather is terrible. It's winter. It's happened again. We'd already survived it once. And it's like, are you joking? Plus, there's our personal circumstances of being in a much smaller space. And then this time, there's schoolwork. And my kids won't do it.
So that challenge. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, I wasn't into being their teacher either. I'm like, I need to set my business. I'm done with it. It's not exciting anymore. So yeah, it was really difficult. So I got a diagnosis, but again, here's the thing. I got a diagnosis. I was looking through the lens of autism because that's all I had. And I was really lucky and unlucky. I had a psychologist who was recommended because they'd, I don't know, worked with kids. So she did really not know anything about adults with ADHD. Lo and behold, I get a thorough diagnosis, and it's autism. And I'm like so desperate to pass the test. And then my childminder, who we've known a long time, who is both autistic and ADHD, and knows herself inside. I mean, she's in her late 20s, knows everything. And she just went, I'm really sorry. I don't think it's that. Have you asked about ADHD? And then she's like, oh yeah, no, I don't really know much about it, but here's a what's it called? A screener. I literally pass it all like flight, like so extreme. And she goes, yeah, well, you've got that as well. And I'm like, okay, great. But I then later started to sort of really think about it. And when I started to learn about ADHD, it was like a glove. And I went, I don't actually think I'm autistic. I'm not even sure this is right. And it was like Goldilocks. It was almost traumatic not getting it right the first time and realizing that the people I'm giving all this power to, like giving me my diagnosis, don't know very much. So that made me really kind of like really annoyed, actually. I went back to her and very calmly tried to explain why I didn't think it was right, which I realise is professionally quite a lot to go back at someone. But, it's also my life.
Yes.
So, and she sort of came up with a few things. And one of them that really stuck, she said something like, well, when you said to me that you had a photographic memory, that was a real thing for me. And I went, and then I realised, and that was me bullshitting. Sorry if I've used words I'm not allowed to.
Not at all. Yeah, you're absolutely fine. That's interesting.
That's not, of course, I don't have a photographic memory. I have a visual memory, and I sometimes things fly out my mouth that's hyperbole, like totally photographic. It's not. I sometimes use it as a support system to visualize something because my memory is terrible. So the one good thing I did get, which people who just do the psychiatrist route don't get, is I got the cognitive assessment. So I learnt what my peaks were and what my challenges were cognitively.
Oh, that's interesting.
It really helped me.
What areas of cognition did it cover? You talk about working memory, but I mean, we have 5 senses that feed into our brain. You talk about visual, but just watching you there for the last, 10 minutes talking, you're accessing a lot of the auditory stuff as well and the kinesthetic. Yeah. So, tell me about the different areas of cognition. And I apologize, I'm not here I'm not qualified, but I just love human communication. So, what other areas of cognition did that test cover? Because this is the first time I've heard this.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I mean, it was on the one hand stupid that I got a psychologist, because actually with ADHD you want a psychiatrist if you ever want to access medication. So I had to go and do the whole thing again. So when I did do the whole thing again, the psychiatrist screened me without me knowing for autism and actually confirmed what I thought. He said, you've got lots of crossover traits, which I knew. He said, but you haven't got enough to go and to tell you to go and do the diagnosis. I thought, isn't that interesting? So because that was my instinct. And obviously it's difficult in this field because I'm not rejecting it. And this isn't ableism. It was just really feeling like the Goldilocks thing of it's just not quite right. So yeah, that was that. And you're asking me to remember, so I'm going to go with what I remember, George, not what actually everything was.
That's okay. I gaslight myself 20 times a day anyway, so don't worry at all. I'm excited. So my version of reality sometimes just isn't, so don't worry, that's fine.
But the ones that I remember and the ones I use in my training is that my verbal skills, because you remember, to be neurodivergent, the difference is that we're really spiky. Our strengths and our challenges are just far away from each other. You know, even if my strengths only hit average and my weaknesses were really, really under average, it's more about the distance between them than where they are in relation to average. Anyway, the numbers, if your average is like 95 to 105, and my verbal is 130.
Right.
Never shut up, always talking. That. However, my processing skills, like my speed and my working memory, are both around 89. So 89, 130 is quite a gap. And that's the queasy nature, and that's exactly how I experienced, you know, academics and things, of being on the one hand, oh, she should go to Cambridge, she's so clever, she's so bright. What happened there in your exams, Katie? It was that.
That's interesting. And again, if I could just probe a little bit deeper, because I talk to a lot of people with this condition, and I reflect with myself a lot as well. And often, you know, if you put me into a low pressure environment, I'm terrible. But you put me into a high pressure, almost an emergency situation, and people say, how calm you are, George. And I think we all, you know, cram for exams, you know, at school and do well because we're high functioning, if there's such a word as high functioning. It's interesting on the average, or the difference between the two, the peaks and the troughs there. Your challenges then, I never shut up, and my biggest problem with this particular podcast is actually not talking over people when they're talking. And I've constantly got this dialogue going on in my head: George, don't speak, George, don't speak, let the person finish before, and then I've forgotten the next question before it comes along. So over here on the screen, there's a ton of questions, and I eventually get to where I'm going. So verbal, visual, what about emotionally? Again, you know, just finding out about the different senses essentially that relate to your peaks and troughs. So the kinesthetics, or the feelings, the emotions. How does that work with you as well?
So I think that, like a lot of ADHDs, when I work with ADHDs, I get kind of two types. I get the kind of type that cries all the time, and they'll even say it. Don't mind me, I'll just cry whenever. Or I get the really scared of my emotions. They're on ice, and what do you mean we're going to do emotional granularity? Like, no. And I'm like, I'm not your coach if you're not willing to go there. But I also normalize it. And I was the second type. I was the, it's shoved under a carpet because I've been caught out too many times and I don't even know how to access it anymore. And that's probably where I'd got to. But only through learnt behavior. Like, who was I really? Very emotional. And I remember my mum saying, I think my mum, I think my mum's more on the autistic spectrum. And I think she said to me once, I used to, your emotions used to worry me. Like, she was almost concerned I had too many.
Same. The same. My mom said the same about me as well, actually. It's very, very interesting, actually. And again, we know that the development of the prefrontal cortex and the executive management, as we read in all the texts, say emotional control is a thing. Mm-hmm. May I just ask, and again, you know, this episode is really about you, but I'm fascinated by also the work that you do. And again, obviously, without breaking any confidences of specific cases, I'm fascinated at the differences of ADHD in both men and women. Do you have any thoughts or, you know, comments on the differences there? You know, some people say to me, female or ladies who have spoken to me on this podcast say, you know, women tend to internalize their emotions a lot more than men, and that they're not as externalized. And the phrase naughty boy comes out quite a bit, you know, with men and children as well. I certainly see that in myself. I see it in others. But what's your thoughts on that as well?
So I do coach a number of men. I'd say predominantly I coach women. And I think even within women, there's lots of different types. So there's not one type. I think with men, I've seen that you've also got the misogyny that you internalize, which means your emotions are not allowed here because that's not what men do. And I think that's, I've held beautiful coaching calls with men where they finally hit the emotion, and they are so pleased with themselves by this point because we've couched it as gold. But they also get really upset because they realize how they have not been allowed to be this, and they realize where all the messaging has come from. And I can see it in my own kids. I can see it in what they imbibe through school and life. I sit on the couch and bawl at anything, pretty much anything. And my 7-year-old goes, "Oh God, Mum, you're not crying." And then he actually left the room the other day because he'd seen the film already and knew the bit. I think we were watching Sing or something, Sing 2. And he walked out. "You come back in now." So I mean, but I'm trying. I want to normalize it because I think it's really important to normalize feelings and crying. But I also know that when I didn't know how to access or didn't understand my emotions, I found other people's emotions quite problematic. So I also wonder if that's what's going on for them.
That's interesting. And relationships with others, I mean, pre and post diagnosis, did you, on the day of real diagnosis, because you kind of had two there that you mentioned, on the day of real diagnosis, did you sit down and have this kind of cathartic moment where you reflected upon everything in your life and said, "Oh yeah, that's now because of this thing"? Or did you just say, "No, I'm now carrying on"? Because being in that state of burnout, you probably were kind of just a sense of relief. But I don't want to speak for you. I'm just intrigued on, how diagnosis really, what it did for you,
Yeah. I think that it was a few things, really. I remember in lockdown. So by lockdown, we were about a year after burnout, or a bit more.
Okay.
Something like that. It might even been 2 years. So actually, I had sort of been in and out, had finally left education. I'd kind of moved into self-employment and all that kind of thing. And with the coaching, I was still sort of in the process of finding myself. And then this happened. And I was really relieved. And even on the misdiagnosis, as it were, it still revealed a huge amount for me, and was very cathartic. But remember, I was in a trapped situation with my kid. I wasn't in a great mental space.
Yes.
And I think what I did was I jumped into rescuer. We are making a business out of this now. I have done absolutely no work on myself and how I feel, but we will be doing a bit, let's forge forward. Because it was like, this is my only way out. And, I wasn't just dealing with my own mental health. My son really struggled with lockdown in that one, in terms of being trapped and feeling like endless, the never ending of the sort of, when will I ever get back to normal? Which was really, really difficult as well. So I don't think I was in a great space. But I think I never really went into the grief part. But I think because I sort of had a bit more of a journey after that in business, I've sort of gone up and down and done all the different stages in different parts. But like lots of ADHDers, if you think about the Thrive model of trauma recovery, I rushed right to the end and tried to do the experience bit and contribution way before I'd done any actual work on myself. And then I've been doing it retrospectively, and I think loads of ADHDers do that.
Yeah, it's kind of how we do it. It's chasing the prize very quickly, right? For the satisfaction and the speed at which we do it,
Yes.
And then others tend to catch up as well. One point I'd just like to go back to, if I may, and it was around, you used the word misdiagnosis. I called it the second diagnosis, if you like.
Yeah.
What I'm very interested in as part of this podcast for others who are listening is that the different countries around the world, um, this being the UK that we're talking about, all have a different. They're at a different stage on the life cycle of one neurodiversity to ADHD, if you like. And I feel I'm English. I've lived in Ireland now for just over 20 years, and I feel that Ireland is kind of quite low down on the uh, on how far advanced it is with one, with diagnosis, two, with social acceptability, two, just society in general. A lot of people say to me still, oh, that doesn't exist, George, you're making it up because you get free speed, and stuff like that, right? I get it. In your world, and again, what you do professionally now and previously, you kind of erred on the the lack of maturity of understanding of the conditions, and I'll say conditions plural, if I may, for the purposes of this. But I'm just fascinated where you believe it is, in the UK, specifically Bristol, but also compared to, colleagues that you may have and friends you may have overseas as well. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, so colleagues overseas, I obviously have a business partner for my academy in New Zealand, who's sort of emigrated out there. And whilst it's still quite new, from some perspectives, there's a lot of indigenous and the Maori, for example, see ADHD as one with many thoughts, for example. That's how it's sort of spelt out, and there's a really different way of couching difference, right? And this idea of this medical model of deficit just doesn't really exist. On the other hand, there are lots of cultures where disability is seen as, witchery and demon, all that sort of thing. I remember, I think I lived in Spain for my third maternity, and I think I mentioned wondering if I myself was neurodivergent or my kids or something like that, and an old primary school teacher sort of said, no, it's ridiculous, no, absolutely not. And Spain is in some ways quite far behind in some ways, in some
Yes.
ways they're utterly wonderful and brilliant, and I frankly would like to live there. but I think from the more traditional societies where there's more conforming and there's more one way to do things around here, are going to struggle more when something rocks the paradigm, right? And when you have societies that pedestal doctors, yes doctor, no doctor, anything you say, or teachers or anything else, then we're going to it's going to be tricky. I realise now I was definitely not the only teacher and senior leader who is neurodivergent. Far from it. In fact, I think it's a great fit for many of us. And until those people in the top positions own theirs, and when I say own, I mean really neuroaffirmatively own it, nothing's going to change. Nothing is going to change. We're still going to be siloing and deficiting, and that's where I just lost interest in trying to change the system in that way, in education. I'm sort of waiting for them to catch up, and they will, because I do think people are finding out at a rate of not the deficit model, and even the way we see behavior still as a judgment rather than of need. It's just, it's tiresome.
It is. I think you're right about that, actually, because I've got friends in the US now who, certainly over here in Europe as well, who look at not the education system, but in the adult world, if you like, the benefits of psychological safety in the workplace, allowing those who are extrovert and introvert to be able to communicate as part of a team, but also to build the anatomy, if you like, of a neurodivergent team to reap better results for that team, and given environmental and behavioral elements to that as well. I don't know what that looks like yet. I'm kind of excited to see how that's going to develop when, if and when the corporate world kind of adopts that, because many have, diversity policies in place, and maybe they're just tick box exercises for the Sarbanes-Oxley thing. I don't know, but I kind of hope that, if you take somebody with autism or somebody with ADHD or somebody with another neurodivergent trait, that placed into the right role with the right support structure and the right communication with others will actually let them run miles, and I think probably at a greater rate of knots than actually artificial intelligence is as a competitor over there. The human brain is phenomenal. Can I just ask you, I think you've alluded to this already, medication. I medicate, I take, while I'm doing it, I take 20 milligrams of Ritalin, if you can see that, which is the long-acting one. And I take that about 5 times a month, right? I don't take it every day. I take it on what I call my stupid days. Do you medicate yourself, or have you chosen not to?
I have chosen to, but like
Okay.
you, I choose to do it when is appropriate. I think it's about it being situational. It took me a while to realize that it might be something that was useful. I think when you find out when you're 40 and you've been and done lots of stuff, there's a bit of you that realizes you've got a lot of support mechanisms, although some of them aren't very helpful. So, I titrated and I was smacked up on caffeine during the titration, and it took me quite a while to realize that maybe if I came off that much coffee, I might have a better chance at knowing what was the right dose, or whether it was worth taking. So I'd have like quite instant reactions to medication and be like, God, no, I'm not doing that. And also did stupid things. Like I took Elvance on the day that I took my kids to Alton Towers. Why would you do that? Why would you go and shake your brain on roller coasters while smacked up on probably the wrong dose? I mean, wow.
Yeah.
But you don't know until you
You don't know until you try it, right? Absolutely. No, I get it. I get it. From one ADHD to another, I share that post-event stupidity where you think to yourself, "My God, what did I do that for?" And then the guilt sets in and the shame, and how could I be so stupid to do that? No, I completely share that. Do you? As I said, the reason for me that I take Ritalin LA on what I call stupid days is because I am otherwise unable to function. And what I mean by that is if I've got a meeting, or I have to present, or I have to be in a room with other people, and my brain isn't working on that day, then Ritalin for me allows me to think clearly without being overwhelmed, and to the point where I can't even read sentences properly or do basic maths on those stupid days, unfortunately. And I say this a lot, is that I can't tell you if tomorrow is going to be a stupid day or a clever day. No idea. I don't know if I'm going to have 10 clever days in a row, whether exercise makes a difference to that or it doesn't, or, what other environmental things work for me. It's just some days I wake up in a stupid universe, right? It's as simple as that. So, that's mine. For you, you mentioned the medication. For you, does it give you a sense of quietness, a lack of being overwhelmed? What is it for you specifically, the medication? What does it do?
I mean, honestly, not loads. It doesn't do loads. I'm only on 18 milligrams. I wonder whether I need more now that I've quit the coffee.
Okay.
So I'm drinking tea, but I had one of those times where when someone comes to visit and you give them some of your coffee and they spit it out, and you realize, yeah, it's not just a cup, is it? Like I've probably got 3 cups in that cup. So I think I was really mainlining coffee on non-stupid days, as you talk about a hell of a lot more. So now I don't. I think it just gives me that boost. I have to be careful though, because I'm like a hyperactivator. So my issue is coming down. So if I get any whiff of this medication is stopping my sleep, then I'm like, I'm out, I'm not doing it. And I've realized that if I take it when I'm doing the kind of marathon type work, like being in a conference, I went to the ADHD conference and I was on the meds and I really struggled to sleep. And I thought, actually, maybe that wasn't the time to be on the meds. Even though I was on all the time, actually, I can rely on my own kind of interest brain to be on around people. And I really didn't need it for that. But generally, it is quite helpful. But it's helpful to a certain point. I'm writing a book at the moment. I can't quite believe I've said that whilst we're recording, but I'm realizing how my focus works, and if I don't get up really early, by the time we hit 12, if I haven't done a certain amount, the whole day is just, may as well give up.
Forget it.
Yeah, it's not happening.
I so relate to that, and I actually get up at 5 a.m. My wife,
wow,
she's like, why? And I read a book, actually. There's a guy who has written a book called the 5 a.m. Club.
yes,
Maybe you should have a read as well. But yeah, if it hits 12 and I've not achieved everything on my to-do list that day, then the rest of the day is a complete write-off. It's as simple as that. And that's a consistent model for me over, Jesus, I don't know how many years, we talk about medication. We talk about, self-medicating. You talk about coffee there, and alternatives to that. We've all read the research on nutrition, and people say, there's nothing better than a good balanced, good quality, high quality, low carbohydrates, but still carbohydrates as well. In your experience, is nutrition important to an ADHD's well-being, or not? And again, there is no right answer to this. I'm just interested in opinions.
Yeah, I think there is, and I think for me, I call it, well, I don't call it, it is the lean and clean diet, James Dugan, and I followed that a while ago, but way before I knew I had ADHD. I knew that carbs, particularly white carbs and sugar in general, interestingly, I can cut carbs and still have a bit of sugar, and it still has a really good effect. But I know that the sugar is often the dopamine seeking brain. And so that's another reason I kind of think, well, that might be a reason to go on that long release medication, because you're going to do it no matter what. Like, no matter what, you will self-medicate. And that's that acceptance that it's not because that is my brain seeking stuff. One of the hardest things is telling my brain that likes to tigger it at night. Like, suddenly we wake up like, let's do silly things. It's like, no, it's bedtime. No, you don't need any sugar because we're not carrying on now. We could just go to bed. So yeah, there's a bit of that, but I really like I like it when I do lean and clean, and I find it much easier to do in hot countries. So the Mediterranean diet is absolutely perfect for me, and obviously it's much easier to eat like that. I literally have no sugar cravings when I was living in Spain. Zilch. Whereas you come here and it's like, oh. So I really struggle with this kind of time of year, and the kind of constant eating and all of that stuff, and just, it's like in the end, I feel like I'm sort of in a chocolate fondue, and I've been trying to get out, and then in the end, I just go, I can't. I'm out now.
And as somebody with ADHD myself, I talk about the nirvana of diets. You mentioned the Dukan diet, the Mediterranean diet, and so on and so forth, and we all know the value that brings to us personally. one of the things I find myself doing from time to time is going, yeah, I'm on that now, and then I'll deliberately sabotage it from time to time. And what's consistent or seems consistent from all the people I've spoken to so far is that most people will actually do that deliberately. One, because of the Tigger effect. Actually, and I'm gonna plagiarize that phrase now. I love it. I love it. Just to get back to, by sabotaging, you do that and you go, oh damn, I feel like shit, oh dear, right, now I can get back on track again. Is that you? You're nodding, so is that you as well?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's self-sabotage. Sometimes it's because I'm not monitoring my action. A lot of it's the now, not now. So right now I want to eat peanut butter and carbs, so I'm going to do it. And
Yeah.
I'm not thinking about tomorrow or the next or the why. Or we forget the why. So I think that's a really important one. And I've been really thinking about that recently is what is my why? So if you were raised a woman in the 90s, the why was always about looking like all the models and it was all really boring, external shit. This is really not my why. Just like my why for exercise isn't about losing weight, it's self-regulation. That's why I beast it. That's why I have to make myself do weights, because all I really want to do is run. And I have to, as I'm getting older, it's like, do more weights. Don't just stay on the flipping runner forever and a day, sweating your guts off. And I think that I've completely forgotten what I'm saying now.
No, you're fine. Honestly, don't worry. I keep looking at the camera, going, what am I doing here? No, honestly.
Where the train went. What were we talking about?
No, it's okay. I wrote it down.
Whether
It's fine.
I fell off, whether I fall off. Yeah, I always fall off.
Do you sabotage?
Yeah,
no, but do you, is it deliberate sabotage because of the Tigger brain, or do you just fall off because of the now, not now? I mean,
both and all the time. I mean, all of it. But I think what I was trying to say was the why. I think my new why, and this is much more coachy and makes sense to me now, is when I am about a stone lighter than I am now, right? I am so much more in tune with my physical body. And that is so important to me, because I need to stay in touch with my body, because that's what's telling me about my feelings. That's what's telling me about my needs. And when I just cut off, I've got a very speedy brain and often feel like I'm just lugging this shit with me. That can't happen anymore. And this idea about treating your body, which you're stuck with, this is your car for life, like a temple, and not being a jokey and British about it. Let's be serious, I mean, this is all we've got. So I think I'm realizing more and more that that's the drug of choice for me, is ultra healthy. Kind of always was, When I smoked, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And I've started to get that way about alcohol as well. I'm a bit repulsed,
That's interesting. You should say that. Actually, I'm an ex-smoker as well and feel the same way. And I want to say I'm an ex-drinker. I'm not. I will still have a glass of wine from time to time, but the distance between units of alcohol, and it's not just the mental part of that either, it's the physical. I know even with one glass of wine, or living in Ireland, it's really tough because the society's around the consumption of alcohol, and a pint of beer for the next day, the joints hurt and you kind of go, oh, I'm sluggish, I'm not, it doesn't bode well, and probably is catalyzed for ADHDers as well, because we're kind of hypersensitive to those things as well, I believe, so it's very important. Tell me the work that you're doing, because I kind of wanted to get the story from you, and I'm fascinated by your, the work that you're doing. You ran to the end, you did all of your self-work retrospectively as well, and talking to you, which is such a joy. You seem so acceptant of yourself as well. I kind of want to be like that myself. I have days when I'm acceptant of myself and I'll go out and sing to the world, hey, everybody, I've ADHD and, fuck you all and, blah, 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 and life's great. And then the other days when it's like a bit more serious, and stuff like that. But you found your gold, you found your jewel, you found the thing that lights your brain up. And from the way you're talking, that's a fantastic delight. What do you get from that personally, and how do you relate that into others in terms of the feedback that you get from them as well, if you don't mind me asking? It's you're smiling so much about the work that you're doing, and I'm comparing that to the story you told me about the education profession before compared to now. It's certainly chalk and cheese, I think, anyway. That's what I'm getting from you.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't. I have to say, there was a time when I was so in education. I was there to change the world. I wanted to run that school. I wanted to absolutely, we were in special measures when I went into leadership, and I was absolutely there to change it around, and did. But then got quite deluded with the system. It was austerity. It was all the gross stuff that started to be taken away. It was grim. And it's only got worse since I've left. And I do still salute those who are there. But what lights me up is kind of similar to what used to light me up in education. I get really excited when I see the gold in others, and it's like shimmers, and you just go like, yes, you are, like, amazing. And when it's your tribe as well, and I don't use that term lightly, but when your community that's often been so downtrodden realizes how fucking cool they actually could be or are, right? They just get a tangible feel of it. It's so exciting, because it's like, I sort of liken it to, remember in the playground you used to play stuck in the mud, and you'd have your hands out, and you have to run under people and free them, and then you'd get caught, and then they'd free you, and all this. It feels like that. It feels like that. Like, I've suddenly got my freedom, and you're just running under people's arms, and they get their freedom, and it's so exciting, because the normalizing and the realizing, like, a lot of positive psychology can feel a little bit forced. Like, no, just think about the positives, even if there aren't really any. Let's just, make you feel better. Whereas there is so much buried gold, so much wasted talent in neurodivergence. And I just genuinely believe that. And I think the beauty of being diagnosed at 40 was when I got gaslit by medical professionals, which I did. I literally was like, who the hell are you talking to? It wasn't even I didn't even get the rejection sensitivity, battering in my body. I was literally, it was just like, it was Tigger. Tigger came out, was like, hell no. And I had it at the conference as well. I went to the ADHD conference this year on my own, like, with my little stall, all these clinicians referring to us as patients. And I was just like, I started to get a bit like, oh, and I realized how situational it is. I felt so disabled by the end. And I was like, hell no, I'm coming back with an army, and I'm making sure we're on the podium, because this isn't happening anymore. You're all here to supposedly help us, but you're making it worse. This ableism is making it worse. We've got to stop this shit. And the autistic community is ahead of us, and we need to learn and do better very, very quickly, because what's going on in our community with the medication shortages, with the gaslighting, usually from the right-wing press, I mean, it's not okay,
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you there as well. Actually, it's a few other people I've spoken to about this, that in the United States, and someone said to me in the United Kingdom as well that ADHD is actually a disability, right? And you can actually get a disabled sticker in the States. I can't believe that's true in the UK. It certainly isn't here anyway. I want people. The reason I set this podcast up, and I'm one of many, and I'm very grateful to have people like yourself coming to talk. But I was so disappointed when you read the European ADHD website, or you look at Chad in the United States, or you look at others from around the world. It's all about, 5 times more likely to commit suicide, 5 times more likely to do criminal activity. Yeah, because they people with ADHD are in Tigger mode. They're self-medicating. They're not understanding themselves. And do you know what? Given the right set of circumstances and opportunity, those people will take the human race further forward faster than ever anybody else can possibly do. And those with other neurodivergent traits will as well. So let's just take those who have been successful, and it's a relative term, and just get those stories out so that hopefully people will listen to that and go, yeah, actually, my situation is the same. I'm that way, but I don't have to go down the dark road. I can go down another road. And that's really what I wanted to get out there in the world. And so far, everybody I've spoken to has been phenomenal in the way that they've shared their stories, and the feedback we're getting it is so lovely as well. So you're right. It's not a disability. It's a difference, and it's a very good difference, I think.
Yeah. I mean, let me say one thing there though, because this is interesting. It's not a disability most of the time. It's a situational disability. We are
Yes.
up to 30% impaired some of the time, which means sometimes and up to. These are big caveats, which means absolutely about the environment. It's absolutely about how we are managing ourselves. It's absolutely about the task we're trying to do. That's the situational variability. Do I sometimes feel incredibly disabled? Yes. Yes. Just today, I'm trying to sort out government gateway crap with my tax stuff. I've got a VA. I can't even manage it with her. I'm going to have to go back to my accountants. And you're like, even with support, I'm getting this crashing sense of I might never manage it. And of course I will, George, and I will find a way. But I can feel very, very, very disabled, and then my memory and the overwhelm will come in, and I'll be in that place of, well, you may have just done a podcast, and you may have just done this, and you may be writing a book, and you may have done a TED talk, but you can't even get on Government Gateway, mate. And that is very, very disabling. Or maybe I don't get on Government Gateway and I end up with a massive fine, and all my profits end up going to the government anyway, right? That sort of thing happens to ADHDers.
It does.
And so, we need understanding, but more than anything, we need to understand ourselves. Because what I'm learning in the community is the minute we've got the knowledge, we are very articulate. The issue is understanding and loving ourselves first. So I think a lot of the time, ADHDers get the diagnosis and then hope that everybody around them will just get it. And it's like, no, the work is here, but you need help to do that. And this is where the coaching comes in. And so many people don't access coaching. And the idea that you're just going to read some books and do it on your own, I just think is
it's ludicrous.
Ludicrous. But we also need really, really well-trained coaches. And that's why I've set up Goldmind Academy with Alex.
I'm delighted to hear about that, and it's probably time to talk a little bit about that, if you wouldn't mind, because in my own experience, actually, and I have an ADHD coach as well, that I spend time with quite a lot, actually. Talk about your Goldmind Academy and why you set it up, what it's about, and the structure of it. And it's great that Alex is in New Zealand.
Yeah,
right?
Alex Campbell is in New Zealand. Alex's
Brilliant.
background was creative industries, film and TV, and then he trained as a psychotherapist, and he did that for a while, and then he went into coaching, and then ADHD coaching. So I was really keen to sort of join up with somebody who'd done the sort of psychotherapy stuff as well. My feeling was that one of the things that when I was doing my training for ADHD coaching, what wasn't being spoken about enough was you got two things going on when you're late diagnosed. There's I am ADHD and these are my differences and I need to learn that. But I'm also dealing with trauma. I'm dealing with the fact that I haven't known all my life and what that has then generated in terms of survival. And that's huge. And that's the bit that wasn't really being spoken about. And my feeling is that if we don't get that work done as coaches, we're not holding space cleanly. And we need to know our own transformational journey. We need to have gone through some of these really important steps of, sorry for the
hello
dog in the background. You know, we've got awareness, we've got understanding, we've got acceptance. We've then got the self-validation. This is a huge one. If we don't self-validate and we're continuing to get external validation, it's very hard to get that empowerment piece. Then we do self-advocacy, and then we can do ADHD on purpose. And all right, no ADHD does anything in an order, let's face it, neither do I. But this is the kind of what we're moving through, I think, in ADHD coaching. And so our training for all ADHDers, you don't need to want to be a coach. The first module is just about the ADHD lens. We go through the executive functions, but we do it very experientially in community. We then have a second module, which is Alex's favourite, because he's just loves emotions. And it's all takes the trauma recovery model, the Thrive trauma recovery. And this is where we do a lot of our working on our own narrative and our own path to acceptance and our own, really sort of get the understanding around emotional granularity. Let's find our feelings again. Let's figure out how to listen to them, how to find them, how to pinpoint them. And then we've got something to work with. And what our story is, because it's often our story from all that time of not knowing that's holding us back.
Yes.
And then we have, for those people who haven't done any coaching, we have quite an intense how to be a coach. But obviously you've got an ADHD lens, and we do as well. And then you're trained as a coach, and we say that you're ADHD informed. And then for those people who are already coaches, or if they then want to carry on, we've got our final module, which is ADHD coaching, and it's specialist, very, very practical. And we're just in the middle of finishing our pilot at the moment, which is very exciting. I was always slightly like, oh, this is the one I feel most like, who are you? Who do you think you are? And I just love it. I've realized how much I love every single module. I love seeing people who did not know how to coach within 10 weeks coaching at a level that's like, wow. And I love, really going to the ins and outs of how ADHD coaching is different from standard coaching. I love it.
Katie, that is absolutely phenomenal to hear that you've identified. If we were talking about just business and entrepreneurship, you'd identified a gap in the market. But what you've just described to me there about that trauma element is absolutely missing from other coaching training that I've seen, and how to overcome that, and the sense of shame that whether it's dysmorphic, the rejection sensitive dysphoria, or just a sense of shame, the being naked walking down the street like the lady in Game of Thrones, thinking everybody knows, and it's a terrible thing. So congratulations on that. And best of luck, actually. And I probably find myself signing up for that, by the way, because I'm kind of enamored by it already. I really am, just thinking about the possibilities and the learnings from it. Where do you think, we talked earlier about, the life cycle, the maturity level of the understanding of ADHD in society. And I feel it's not that far evolved. I mean, I'm 54 years old and was diagnosed at 43. And, when I was a kid at school, I was just the naughty boy, and, the school reports, I always say this in every podcast, the school reports for every subject had two columns. One was effort and one was attainment. My effort was always E and F, and my attainment was always A. And the teachers were frustrated the hell out of me because I just, but again, if I was to look at that, it was just because I was going to the end right at the very beginning. And, I have a 10-year-old son as well, and a 32-year-old daughter who lives in the States. Both have ADHD and both have their own paths and journeys. But my 10-year-old son, his education with that now is so much more advanced. The inclusivity, the style in which he's, supported, if you like. And yet I feel it could be, so much further on. The maturity level, where do you think if we were talking about technology, the next iPhone or whatever, but in terms of ADHD coaching, do you have a view of where the future of that lay at all? I mean, that's a very left field question, by the way, and I just wanted to throw that out there.
Where you're asking, where do I think ADHD coaching is going?
Yeah. Well, one, where is ADHD coaching in terms of, development? You guys are obviously, you and Alex are now taking it to the next level with those two very, very specific parts on trauma and so on and so forth. But is there a kind of a developmental element that in, say, 10, 15, 20 years time, that it will be something else, where medication doesn't exist, or it does, but it's combined with other elements of support modes? I don't know. I'm just interested in the technology and the maturity of how it's dealt with within society. I'm fascinated by that, and what your thoughts are on that for the future.
I mean, what would I find it hard to predict the future without going into what would I like it to be, George. My magical thinking.
Well, that's okay, by the way.
I guess, I would like to see a much more holistic vision of ADHD. I think a lot of work around trauma recovery and understanding difference and self-advocacy is the way forward. And I have to say, I realise that I live in a bit of a bubble. I hold very clean spaces. We make it very, very safe. I work with lots of brilliant people, often who've done a lot of work on themselves. And I realised, neurodivergent or not, that's really lucky. Like if you then go out into the wide world, just being at home for Christmas and with family members, you sort of go, oh, you're not a coach, and that sort of level of awareness that makes everything safer, right? And that where people manage themselves. I just would love a world where we're doing a lot more of that, and we're able to, it's almost like learning to parent yourself, actually. I think that's what coaching has helped me to do, particularly in moments of dysregulation, particularly around parenting ADHD, which frankly, at times, I feel like I've gone right back to the, ableist beginnings in how I'm judging my son's behavior, for example. And I'd like to see a lot more advocacy coming from coaches. I want to hear their voices, because I'm not seeing that yet. I hear a lot around clinicians who are really quite one-dimensional about, dealing with a problem, which it really isn't. And I can see how there's still some real mismatches in ADHD in both schools and workplaces, of things that can be judged one way that really aren't that, and how quickly things can escalate. And I really hope, I went and got my hair cut yesterday, and mentioned that one of my son's autistic, one's ADHD. And the guy went, oh my God, I mean, who isn't? I got diagnosed and my son's diagnosed. And I was like, oh, wow, life is changing. My hairdresser, is telling me about all the diagnosis. And we were kind of talking it through, and he was talking about his son is in year 4, so primary school. And he said there's like 8 of them in a class who have ADHD. And I thought, wow, so this is where we're getting to. Not all of them have a diagnosis, but they're now listening to parents. So, the hairdresser who did have the diagnosis was being quite dismissive, like, they don't even have a diagnosis. And I was like, but actually, I'm really glad that the school is listening to them, that they think they have. What would I do if I knew I had a cluster of wonderful thinkers in one room, you know? And they want to spread them all out, of course, because they're scared, right? And I just thought, I would have them all in one, because if you teach, basically ADHDers are like the canaries in the coal mine, really, like a lot of neurodivergent thinkers, and they need the best educators. So what I would do is I would have just selected my absolute best teachers and said, you are going to be teaching in that room, and in that room we'll be doing things slightly differently, but it will benefit everyone. Right?
That's interesting. And just as you were talking there, I think you're absolutely right. Just as you were talking there, my brain went, is there a word for a collective of ADHDers? And if there isn't, we'll come up with one, okay? And we'll copyright it or something. There's got to be a word for it. Have you? It's interesting, actually. I was just kind of reflecting in my life. Has there been any? Have I been in the company of many ADHDers and just ADHDers at one time? And I don't know if I have, actually. Maybe one or two mixed in with others, but never just ADHDers. And I just wonder what that would be like, actually. Would that work, or would it be like a bunch of free radicals kind of going off into different directions? I don't know. You know, how would that work?
Well, I think there's a caveat there that you probably have been in a room with a load of ADHDers, but they didn't know that they were. So there's a difference, right?
Yeah.
What would it be like to be in a room with ADHDers that know that they have ADHD?
Yeah.
Right? Because that's different. And then let's add another layer. What would it be like to be in a room with ADHDers who know they have ADHD and own their ADHD, like they're doing their ADHD on purpose? Because that would be amazing, you know?
Yeah, wouldn't it? Absolutely.
And I'm going to be in that situation. So we have our module 3 and our module 4. We've decided to do some residentials, because we thought if we're this excited about doing this, then so will all our clients. And lo and behold, it's booking up fast. So we have a residential in Spain, in Granada, to do module 3 in May. And we also have another residential for module 4 in Falmouth. So I will be in that room, and I'll let you know, George.
Oh, please. And I'm delighted. And by the way, if you see my name popping up on the registration, yeah, I kind of mean that as well. I'll come and have a look. I'd love to. I'd be delighted.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Katie, I've got one last question for you, and I always leave this to the end. And I kind of think getting to know you now, what the answer is going to be, but I have to ask it. If I could magically click my fingers and say, hey, Katie, you've now got a neurotypical brain, would you want that?
It's so funny. When I was a kid, I wrote a poem about boredom. And the minute you said that, and I said something about it being like in a pool of molten silver, and it just went on forever. And that's the image I had. No, absolutely not. I mean, rough with the smooth, right? Like, and there is a lot. We live a spiky life. We have highs and we have lows, right? But yeah. I think I was coaching an ADHDer today who's older, and we were talking about the now, not now, and when you're in the now and it's shit, and how you can feel stuck, and they said, well, I have learnt with age that that's not true, and that I can feel better tomorrow. And I thought, yes, of course, we do learn these things with age, and we do learn that we can move through these things, you know. Yes. And so, yeah, I think this is where we learn the emotional granularity. There is nothing wrong with feeling low.
No.
Get granular about it. Find out what it is. Figure out what you need and where it might have come from. And then it's all fascinating, right? And it's not scary and all-consuming anymore. But, in order to... Sometimes I don't catch that, George. I talk about it, but I can still fall into the, oh, God, it's awful, very quickly.
Absolutely. Do you know, it's funny, the number of people who have signed up to do the podcast with me and then will, and this is the ADHD world, that will cancel just before, okay, George, I'm so sorry. And there's a ton of great reasons that I won't share because I don't want to embarrass anybody. But I know that I'm that person as well. I'm the, if you rang me up now and said, George, will you talk for an hour and do a podcast? Let's do it right now. Come on, let's go. I'm ready. But if you say, let's do it in a week's time, I want to, but actually, am I going to? Unlikely, it's the now, not now. You're absolutely right. Katie Friedman, thank you. That's been a delightful chat. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
I loved it. Thank you.